A young maid's daughter saves the life of a stranger in a critical moment. In the following days, he finds himself obsessed with a strange sense of familiarity. Hiring investigators, he soon realizes that this simple life-saving act could be the start of a shocking revelation. What he uncovers could destroy or redeem his future. Before you hear this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales. The suffocating heat seemed to drain all energy from the bustling streets that summer afternoon. Mark Allison was walking down the main avenue, his Italian suit clinging to his body with sweat, when he felt a strange dizziness overwhelm his senses. At 42, the businessman had built a financial empire that placed him among the wealthiest men in the United Kingdom, but at that moment, all the money in the world couldn't stop his legs from trembling like dry twigs. He tried to lean on the first lamppost he found, but darkness was already invading his vision. The voices around him became distant echoes as his body collapsed in the middle of the pavement. Tourists passing by stopped in alarm, forming a circle around the fallen man, but no one quite knew what to do. Some whispered nervously, others pulled out their phones to film the unusual scene. It was then that a 17-year-old girl pushed through the crowd with a determination that contrasted with her age. Sophia had brown hair tied in a simple ponytail and wore the worn uniform of a public school. Without hesitation, she knelt beside the businessman and placed her hands on his chest, beginning chest compressions she had learned in a basic first aid course offered in her community. "Please hold on, you're going to be okay," she repeated, as she pressed the man's chest with strength and precision. An older woman, who had rushed over from a nearby diner, approached the scene. It was Rose, Sophia's mother, who worked as a cleaner in various establishments in the City of London to support her daughter. "Sophia, what are you doing?" Rose asked, breathless. "Mum, he needs help. Has anyone called an ambulance?" Sophia didn't stop the rhythmic compressions on Mark's chest, her small but firm hands keeping his heart beating. Rose looked at the unconscious man's face and felt a strange shiver run down her spine. There was something familiar about his features, but she couldn't quite place what it was. The expensive suit, the gold watch on his wrist, everything indicated he was someone important. But at that moment, he was just a human being who needed help. Paramedics arrived 15 minutes later, enough time for Sophia to keep the businessman's circulation going. As the first responders took over, preparing their equipment and placing Mark on the stretcher, Sophia slowly stepped back, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline. "You saved his life," one of the paramedics told the mother and daughter. "If it weren't for the chest compressions, we would have lost too much time." Rose pulled Sophia by the hand, trying to discreetly move away from the crowd that was still gathered around the ambulance. She knew that people like them usually didn't get involved in situations like this. Poor people had to go unnoticed, especially when there were cameras around and reporters starting to arrive. "Mum, will he be okay?" Sophia asked, looking back as they were led away from the scene. "Yes, he will, my dear. You did what you could." Rose squeezed the teenager's hand, but her heart was pounding for reasons that went beyond concern for the stranger. At the most expensive private hospital in London, Mark awoke 2 hours later in a room with a panoramic view of the city. His head throbbed, and there were various machines connected to his body, but he was alive. The attending physician explained that he had suffered a severe vasovagal syncope, probably caused by extreme stress and exhaustion. "Mr. Allison, you were very lucky. If it hadn't been for the first aid you received on the street, your condition could have become seriously complicated," explained the cardiologist. A young woman performed chest compressions until the ambulance arrived. Mark tried to remember the moments before he fainted, but everything was hazy. There was a female voice, young, pleading for him to hold on, a voice that stirred a strange sensation in his chest, as if he had heard it before somewhere distant in his memory. "Where are they? The young woman, and was there anyone else with her?" "Unfortunately, we don't know, sir. They left before our team arrived. They didn't leave names or contact information." Over the next 2 days, while recovering under medical observation, Mark couldn't get that voice out of his head. There was something about it that deeply disturbed him, a painful familiarity he couldn't explain. He decided he needed to find the people who had saved him, not just to thank them, but to understand why he felt so restless. He hired a private investigation agency and provided all the information he had. A teenage girl, approximately 17 years old, brown hair, public school uniform, accompanied by an older woman, possibly her mother. The description was vague, but Mark was determined to find them. 3 days after being discharged from the hospital, he received a call from the private detective. The information was precise. Sophia and Rose lived in a council estate in the London suburbs. The teenager attended a technical school, and her mother worked as a cleaner in several homes in central London. What the detective said next made Mark's heart almost stop again. "Mr. Allison, there's something interesting about the young woman's mother. Rose Carter worked at your residence many years ago. She was dismissed under, shall we say, delicate circumstances." Mark slowly sat down in his Italian leather armchair, his hands trembling. Rose Carter. The name echoed in his mind like a reverberation from a past he had tried to bury. Fragmented memories began to form. A young housemaid with sweet eyes, the darkest period of his life after his father's loss, and a night that changed everything. At 25, Mark had inherited the family business after his father's sudden passing. Grief consumed him in a way that none of his wealth could alleviate. He vaguely remembered an employee who worked in the family home, someone who offered comfort in a moment of extreme vulnerability. But then came the accusation, her dismissal, the scandal hushed up by the family. Now, 17 years later, a young woman, the same age as at that time had saved his life. An impossible coincidence began to unfold before his eyes, and Mark knew he wouldn't find peace until he uncovered the full truth about that night he had tried to forget for so long. The guilt he had silently carried since then began to reawaken, more intense than ever. If his suspicions were correct, the young woman who saved his life could be much more than just a good Samaritan, and that would change everything. Mark spent the night awake, sifting through his most painful memories in search of answers. Sitting in his private office overlooking London's skyscrapers, he tried to reconstruct the events of 17 years ago. The family mansion had been the scene of dark moments after his father's passing, and Rose was there during the worst days of his life. He remembered her as a young woman a few years older than him, always helpful and discreet. Rose had been hired by Mark's mother, Agnes Allison, to take care of the household duties. She was a beautiful woman with shy smiles and a kind gaze, who seemed to understand the pain he carried without needing words. During the week of his father's funeral, Mark had isolated himself in his chambers, refusing visits from family and business associates. It was Rose who brought his meals, who worried if he was eating, who remained silent when he needed company without conversation. In his state of extreme vulnerability, he had found an unexpected refuge in her. The memory of that night was still hazy in his mind. Mark recalled the despair, the loneliness that seemed to corrode his soul, and how Rose had tried to comfort him when she found him crying alone in the library. What happened between them had been impulsive, charged with raw emotion and a need to feel something beyond pain. He was young, lost, and she had offered the only kind of comfort that seemed real at that moment. The next morning, Agnes discovered Rose leaving Mark's chambers. The reaction was immediate and devastating. The matriarch of the Allison family accused the maid of taking advantage of her son's vulnerability to try to climb the social ladder. Rose was dismissed the same day, under accusation of improper conduct and attempted manipulation. Mark, still hardened by grief and pressured by his family, had not defended Rose. He allowed her to be expelled from the house without even a conversation, without explanations, without any kind of protection. In the following months, he immersed himself in business, traveled abroad, and gradually buried that episode deep in his consciousness. Now, 17 years later, the puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together in a way that terrified him. Sophia was exactly the age a child conceived that night would be today. The young woman who saved his life could be his own daughter, raised in poverty while he accumulated endless wealth. Mark cancelled all his next day's appointments and personally drove to the outskirts of London, where Rose and Sophia lived. The contrast between the affluent London neighbourhood where he grew up and the community he now visited was brutal. Simple houses crowded together on narrow streets, children played amidst the noise of overcrowded buses, and the smell of cheap food mingled with the humid late afternoon heat. He parked his imported car in front of a small, faded blue house with bars on the windows and a tiny garden where a few flowers struggled to survive the heat. His hands trembled as he knocked on the painted wooden door. Rose opened. The door and the world seemed to stop for a few seconds. She had changed, of course. 17 years had left their mark on her face, but her eyes remained the same. Her expression of surprise quickly transformed into something between fear and contained anger. "What do you want here?" Rose asked, her voice firm but clearly shaken. I need to talk to you, and thank your daughter for saving me." Rose glanced around, nervous about the presence of the luxury car in front of her house. Neighbours were already starting to peer through their windows, curious about the unusual visit. "There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Allison. Sophia did what any decent person would do. We don't need thanks." "Please, Rose, just a few minutes." The use of her first name made her face harden even more. "Come in quickly. I don't want the neighbours making up stories." The interior of the house was clean and organized, but evidently simple. Old furniture, walls with some cracks disguised by careful painting, a faded but well-maintained fabric sofa. Everything there spoke of dignity maintained despite financial difficulties. Sophia appeared in the living room, coming from the kitchen where she was preparing a snack after school. Upon seeing Mark, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "It's you, the man from the street. It's good to know you're well," she exclaimed, without any malice or interest beyond human concern. Mark felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the teenager. There was something in her features, in the way she smiled, that stirred a disturbing familiarity. She had her mother's dark eyes, but the shape of her face strongly resembled his own at the same age. "Sophia, go to your room and finish your homework," Rose said dryly. "But, Mum, I wanted to know how he's feeling." "Now, Sophia." The young woman obeyed, but Mark noticed how she looked back before climbing the narrow stairs. There was genuine curiosity in her eyes, without any knowledge of the complex history between her mother and that man. When they were alone, Rose crossed her arms and faced Mark with a mixture of defiance and weariness. "Now tell me what you came here for. After 17 years. Mark gathered his courage and noticed a small scar on Rose's arm, almost imperceptible, but which stirred a specific memory. On the night they spent together, she had accidentally cut herself with a broken glass, and he himself had tended to the wound. "Rose, I remember that night. I remember everything." Her face paled, but her posture remained firm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The scar on your arm. You cut yourself with a piece of glass from the goblet I knocked over. I cleaned the wound myself." Rose instinctively hid her arm, but it was too late. The memory was there, exposed between them, like an old wound that had never fully healed. "And what does that matter now? You've already done all the harm you could do." "Sophia, she's my daughter, isn't she?" The silence that followed was deafening. Rose sat heavily on the sofa, as if her legs could no longer support her. "You destroyed my life that day," she said, her voice low but laden with pain. "Your mother expelled me as if I were a criminal. She said I was an opportunist, that I had seduced you out of self-interest. I could never work in a family home again. The reputation your family created for me followed me for years." Mark sat in the chair opposite her, feeling the weight of every word. "I was young, Rose. I was lost, suffering. And do you think I wasn't suffering too? Do you think it was easy for me to discover I was pregnant with a man who let me be humiliated and expelled without saying a word in my defense? You never sought me out to tell me about the pregnancy." Rose laughed bitterly. "Seek you out? For what? To be humiliated again? To hear that I was making up stories to get money? I knew what your reaction would be. I knew we belonged to different worlds and that you would never accept responsibility." Mark lowered his head, guilt weighing on his shoulders like a mountain. "So Sophia really is. She is your daughter, yes. But that doesn't give you any rights over her. I raised her alone, worked 3 jobs to put her through school. taught her values that your wealth could never buy. Sophia is my daughter." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the young woman coming down the stairs. She had finished her homework and, curious about the prolonged visit, decided to join them again. "May I ask why you came to visit?" "Us?" Sophia asked, with the innocence of someone who didn't understand the underlying tensions of the situation. Mark looked at Rose, who gave him a clear signal with her eyes, not a word about the truth. "I wanted to thank you personally for saving me, and offer a way to reciprocate." "Reciprocate how?" Sophia asked, intrigued. "Sophia, go prepare dinner," Rose interrupted, but Mark realized she also wanted to hear his answer. "I want to help you, financially, with Sophia's studies, with a better home." "We don't need charity," Rose said firmly. "It's not charity, it's responsibility." The words carried a weight that Sophia didn't fully comprehend, but she felt the tension in the air. There was something between her mother and that man that went far beyond a simple thank you for first aid. Mark knew he wouldn't leave there with easy answers or immediate forgiveness, but he had taken the first step. The young woman who saved his life was indeed his daughter, and now he needed to find a way to make up for 17 years of absence without destroying the stability Rose had built on her own. In the weeks that followed that first visit, Mark developed a persistence that surprised even himself. Every day, religiously, he appeared at the door of the faded blue house with small gestures that seemed casual but were carefully planned. Sometimes he brought fresh fruit, saying he had bought too much at the market. Other times he arrived with textbooks, claiming they could help Sophia with her studies. Rose resisted every attempt at rapprochement, but Sophia, with the natural curiosity of a teenager, began to take a genuine interest in the presence of that elegant man who seemed to care so much about them. To her, Mark was simply a kind person who had decided to return a favor. "Mum, why do you always get tense when Mr. Allison comes to visit us?" Sophia asked one afternoon, while helping Rose fold clothes that had been hand-washed. "People like him don't do anything without ulterior motives, dear. Rich men don't waste time on people like us out of generosity." "But he seems sincere, and look how happy he gets when we talk about my studies. I think he really cares." Rose sighed, knowing it was impossible to explain to her daughter the complex web of emotions and guilt that connected her. Family to that man. Sophia had grown up without a father figure, and it was natural for her to be attracted to the masculine attention Mark offered. Mark, in turn, discovered that being close to Sophia awakened feelings in him he had never experienced. Her every smile, every story about school, every small academic achievement she shared filled a void in his chest he didn't even know existed. For the first time in his life, he understood what unconditional love meant. One day, when Sophia mentioned she needed help with math for an important test, Mark offered to tutor her. Rose hesitated, but her daughter's educational need spoke louder than her personal reservations. "Only for a few hours, and I'll be present the entire time," she stipulated firmly. Mark readily agreed, grateful for any opportunity to be near the young woman. During the study sessions, he discovered that Sophia had a lively and curious intelligence, a thirst for learning that deeply moved him. She dreamed of studying engineering, but knew that financial limitations made this goal almost impossible. "If I get a scholarship, I can go to university," Sophia explained, her eyes shining with hope. "My mum works so. Hard to give me an education. I want her to be proud of me." Mark felt his heart clench. There was his daughter, bright and determined, fighting for opportunities he could provide with a simple gesture. But he knew Rose would never accept direct help, especially from him. It was then that he had an idea. Through an intermediary, he discreetly funded an engineering scholarship program for low-income young people. Sophia applied without knowing that the program had been created especially for students like her, and when she was selected, her joy was contagious. "Mum, Mum, I did it! I got a full scholarship to study engineering." Sophia danced through the small house, holding the acceptance letter as if it were the greatest treasure in the world. Rose hugged her daughter, but over Sophia's shoulder, she cast a suspicious glance at Mark, who was present for the celebration. She knew very well that man's ability to move mountains when he wanted something. "What an interesting coincidence," Rose murmured to Mark, as Sophia went upstairs to show the letter to the neighbors. "Sometimes life gives us second chances," he replied, neither denying nor confirming his involvement in the program. "You can't buy a daughter, Mark." "I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to be the father I should have been from the start." The word father, spoken aloud, silenced Rose. Until then, they had danced around the truth, but had not faced it directly. Mark continued, his voice low but firm. "I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I was cowardly and selfish. But Sophia is my daughter, Rose, and I lost 17 years of her life. I don't want to lose another day." Before Rose could respond, Sophia returned, radiant with happiness. Mark decided it was time to take the next step. "Sophia, how about I pick you up from school sometimes? We can get ice cream and talk about your studies." "Really? You'd do that?" Sophia's eyes sparkled with genuine joy. Rose wanted to protest, but she saw the happiness on her daughter's face and didn't have the heart to deny her that small joy. "Only if you want to, dear, and always with agreed times." "Of course I do." Thus began a routine that would change the lives of all three. Mark started picking Sophia up from school twice a week, always punctual, always good-humored. They went to simple ice cream parlors in the neighborhood, talked about her dreams, and slowly Mark began to understand the personality of the daughter he had missed growing up. Sophia was sweet, but determined. She had a keen sense of justice and genuinely cared about the problems of the people around her. She was exactly the kind of person Mark would have been proud to have raised, had he had the chance. But the constant presence of a rich man in the neighborhood began to arouse suspicion among the neighbors. Whispered comments spread through the narrow streets like wildfire. "Why? Does a millionaire come here every week? He must be interested in Rose. She's still a beautiful woman despite her age. Or maybe it's the daughter. Did you see how he looks at the girl? That's not normal. Rich people don't do charity without wanting something in return." The gossip reached Rose's ears through a well-meaning neighbor who was concerned about the family's reputation. "Rose, dear, you need to be careful. People are commenting on that man's visits. Some are saying unpleasant things." Rose felt her stomach sink. It was exactly what she had always feared. Mark's presence in their lives was creating the kind of speculation that could tarnish the reputation she had fought so hard to rebuild after the humiliation of 17 years ago. That night, when Mark came to pick up Sophia for another of their conversations, Rose stopped him at the door. "You can't come here so often anymore, the neighbors are commenting." "What kind of comments?" "The kind a single mother shouldn't have to hear about herself and her daughter." Mark felt a wave of anger. "Then let's stop hiding, let's tell the truth." "The truth? Do you want to expose Sophia to the kind of scandal your family created around me? Do you want her to discover that she was conceived in a moment of weakness and that her father spent 17 years pretending she didn't exist?" "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." Sophia appeared behind her mother, sensing the tension in the conversation. "Did something happen? Why are you arguing?" Mark looked at his daughter, his heart breaking at the confusion and concern in her eyes. "It's nothing, Sophia. Just some adult problems." "Does it have to do with me? With our friendship?" The word friendship echoed painfully in the air. Mark knew it was much more than that, but he also knew he didn't have the right to define the relationship without Rose's consent. "Of course not, dear," Rose replied, forcing a smile. "We're just adjusting some schedules." But Sophia was not foolish. At 17, she had already learned to read adult emotions with precision. There was something going on between her mother and Mark that went far beyond gratitude for first aid. The way they looked at each other, the tension that arose whenever they were alone, the excessive attention he dedicated to her. All of this created a sense of mystery that she couldn't shake from her mind. "Mum," she said that night, as they were getting ready for bed, "why does it seem like you and Mr. Mark have known each other for much longer than since that day on the street?" Rose pretended to be busy tidying the wardrobe, avoiding her daughter's perceptive gaze. "It's just your imagination, Sophia." "It's not my imagination." And why does he care so much about us? Not that I'm complaining, I really like him, but it's strange, isn't it? Rose sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her daughter's hair. Some people just have generous hearts, my dear, but your eyes look sad whenever you talk, as if there's something you're not telling me. Sophia's intuition was sharper than Rose had imagined. The teenager was beginning to realize that there were secrets between the adults in her life, and this deeply bothered her. She had grown up in a relationship of total transparency with her mother, and now she felt that something important was being hidden from her. Mark in turn returned to his mansion that night with a heavy heart. With each passing day, it became harder to keep the secret. Sophia deserved to know the truth about her identity, but Rose had valid reasons for her fear. The revelation could expose the young woman to a kind of public attention that could destroy the peace they had built together. The following weeks passed in an atmosphere of growing tension. Mark continued his visits, but now they were more spaced out and discreet. He had rented a regular car to replace the luxury vehicle that attracted so much attention in the neighborhood. But he still felt the curious stares of the neighbors whenever he appeared. Sophia, however, developed a silent obsession with understanding the true nature of the relationship between her mother and Mark. She began to observe details that had previously gone unnoticed, the way her mother's hand subtly trembled when Mark arrived, the way he looked at her with a mixture of affection and remorse, and especially the physical resemblance between her and the businessman that became more evident with each encounter. One morning, while getting ready for school, Sophia stood before the mirror and truly studied her own features for the first time. The shape of her face, her jawline, even the way she smiled, all of it echoed characteristics she had observed in Mark during their conversations. "Mum," she said during breakfast with a carefully casual voice, "do you have pictures of me when I was a baby?" Rose almost dropped her teacup. Why that question suddenly? Curiosity. I want to see what I was like as a baby, and I want to see if I took after you more, or my father. The silence that followed was laden with meaning. Rose had never shown Sophia pictures from that time, always claiming they were lost in a move. In truth, she had hidden all images from her daughter's early years because they made the resemblance to Mark too evident. "You know we lost those photos when we moved from that old house," Rose lied, hating herself for it. "And about my father? You never wanted to tell me who he was?" Rose felt as if the ground were disappearing beneath her feet. For 17 years she had managed to avoid this conversation with gentle evasions and promises of, "when you're older." But Sophia was now 17 and no longer a child who accepted vague answers. "Your father, he was a complicated person, Sophia. He wasn't part of our lives. But does he know I exist?" The question hit Rose like a punch to the stomach, because now Mark knew, and she could see in his eyes his desperation to be part of the life of the daughter he had lost. "It's complicated, dear. Everything's complicated when it comes to my father," Sophia observed, with a sadness that broke Rose's heart. "Sometimes I wonder if he thinks about me, if he misses me, if—" "Sophia, please stop." "Why, Mum? Why can't I even dream of having a father?" Rose abruptly stood, up from the table, tears threatening to fall. "Because sometimes dreams can turn into nightmares, my dear." Sophia was left alone in the kitchen, more confused than ever. Something was profoundly wrong, and she was determined to find out what it was. That same day, during break at school, Sophia made a decision that would change everything. She used the secretary's phone to call Mark's office. She had memorized the number from seeing Rose write it down so many times when he called to arrange visits. "Mr. Allison, it's Sophia. I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet me in the square near the school this afternoon?" Mark immediately cancelled an important meeting. The urgency in Sophia's voice deeply worried him. When they met in the square, Sophia went straight to the point with the typical courage of youth. "I know there's something between you and my mother that you're not telling me, and I'm 17. I'm no longer a child to be protected from difficult truths." Mark sat on the bench beside her, his heart pounding. This was the moment he both feared and longed for. "Sophia, I noticed that we look alike. Very much alike. And my mum gets strange whenever I talk about my father, and you look at me as if you've known me for a long time." Mark closed his eyes, fighting back tears. His daughter was intelligent and brave, exactly as he had imagined she would be. "You're right. There's something that hasn't been said. Are you my father?" The question hung in the air between them like a bomb ready to explode. Mark looked into Sophia's dark eyes, so similar to Rose's, but with a determination she had inherited from him. I believe so, but we need to be sure." Sophia felt as if the world had stopped spinning. Part of her had always known something was missing from her life, a puzzle piece of her identity that never quite fit. Now, that piece had a name and a face. "Why did my mum never tell me?" Mark took a deep breath, knowing he needed to be honest without destroying the relationship between mother and daughter. "Because she has reasons not to trust me. I made serious mistakes in the past, Sophia. Mistakes that hurt your mother deeply." "What kind of mistakes?" "I was a coward when I should have been brave. I allowed her to be harmed by our closeness, and I wasn't there when you needed me." Sophia processed this information in silence. Throughout her life, she had imagined different scenarios about who her father might be. Sometimes she fantasized that he was a hero she had lost forever. Other times, she feared he was a bad person who had abandoned them because he didn't care. She had never considered the possibility that he was someone who cared, but who had failed. And now, what happens now? First, we need to be sure. I'll get a DNA test. If it confirms I'm your father, then we'll have a very long conversation about the future. And my mum, does she know we're talking about this? No. And she'll be very angry with me for having this conversation with you without her permission. Sophia smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "Let me handle my mum. She protects me too much. But deep down, she knows I need the truth." Mark felt a wave of pride at his daughter's maturity. At 17, she displayed an emotional wisdom he had only acquired much later in life. "Sophia, regardless of the test result, I want you to know that I care deeply about you. These past few months, getting to know you, have been the most significant of my life." "For me too," she admitted, her voice soft. "I always felt something was missing. A piece of the puzzle of my life. Perhaps you are that piece." They remained silent for a few minutes, each absorbing the magnitude of the moment. Finally, Sophia stood up. "I need to go home, and you need to schedule that test. Are you going to tell your mum about our conversation?" "I will, but in my own way, in my own time." Mark watched Sophia walk away, his heart torn between hope and terror. If the test confirmed what he already knew in his heart, his life would change forever. But he also knew that Rose would never forgive him for having this conversation with Sophia without her permission. That night, at the most discreet private laboratory in London, Mark provided a sample for the DNA test. The doctor assured him that the results would be ready in 72 hours, but for Mark each hour felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, Sophia arrived home with a silent determination that Rose recognized immediately. It was the same expression she herself had when she had made an important decision. "Mum, we need to talk." "About what, dear?" "About my father, about Mark, and about why you think you can keep protecting me from the truth." Rose slowly sat down, knowing that the moment she had feared for 17 years had finally arrived. There was no more avoiding or postponing it. Her daughter had grown up and demanded answers she deserved to have. "What do you want to know, Sophia?" "I want to know everything." And for the first time in 17 years, Rose began to tell the truth about the night that changed all their lives, about the man who became Sophia's absent father, and about the secrets she had carried alone for so long. The conversation lasted until dawn, with tears, forgiveness, and finally, the relief of no longer having secrets between mother and daughter. 3 days later, Mark received the call that confirmed what his heart already knew. Sophia was officially his daughter. The DNA test left no room for doubt. Now he needed to decide how to use this information to build a family he had lost for so long, without destroying what Rose had built with so much sacrifice. Mark had been holding the envelope with the DNA test result for 3 hours, without the courage to open it. Sitting in his office, with the panoramic view of London stretching before him, he knew that paper would change his life forever. When he finally broke the seal, the technical words confirmed what his heart already knew: a 99.999% probability of paternity. Sophia was his daughter. He cancelled all his appointments for the day and immediately drove to the faded blue house. This time there was no postponing the definitive conversation with Rose. The test result gave him not only scientific confirmation, but also a courage he had never felt before. Rose opened the door with an expression that blended resignation and apprehension. The conversation with Sophia the night before had lasted hours, and she knew this moment was inevitable. "You told her," Mark said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "She has the right to know the truth about her origins. She always has." "And now?" Rose invited him in, but this time the atmosphere was different. There were no more secrets to hide, no more denial possible. Sophia was at school, which gave them privacy for a conversation that should have happened 17 years ago. "I did the DNA test," Mark said, pulling the paper from his jacket's inner pocket. "And?" 99.99% probability of paternity." Rose closed her eyes, as if she could still pretend this moment wasn't happening. "I knew. I always knew. Why did you never seek me out, Rose? Why did you carry this alone?" "Because I knew you, Mark. I knew your family, your world. I knew they would never accept a child conceived with a housemaid. And I was right, wasn't I? Your mother expelled me from the house as if I were a criminal, just for suspecting what had happened." Mark sat heavily on the simple sofa, the weight of guilt crushing his shoulders. "My mother. Agnes was always very protective of the family's reputation, but that doesn't justify my cowardice. You were 25, Mark. You were old enough to make your own decisions, but you chose to remain silent and let me face the consequences alone. I know, and I'm so sorry, more than you can imagine. Your remorse doesn't give back the 17 years Sophia grew up without a father. It doesn't erase the nights I spent crying, wondering if I had made the right decision not to seek you out. It doesn't pay for the humiliating jobs I had to take to raise our daughter." The word "our" hung in the air between them, laden with meaning and possibility. "I want to be part of her life, Rose. I want to be the father I should have been from the start." "And you think it's that simple? That you can just show up with your money and buy 17 years of absence? It's not about money." "No? Then why was the first thing you offered financial help? Why did you create a specific scholarship program for Sophia? All you know how to do is solve problems with money." Mark stood up, frustrated. "Because it's the only way I know how to show I care. Because I want her to have the opportunities I can provide. And what she needs from you cannot be bought, Mark. She needs presence, consistency, a father who is there in difficult times, not just when it's convenient." Before Mark could respond, they heard the front door open. Sophia had arrived home from school earlier than usual, and the tension in the living room was palpable. "Hi, Mum." "Hi." "Dad," Sophia said, testing the word carefully, but also with a hint of defiance. Rose and Mark exchanged glances, surprised by the young woman's directness. "Sophia, we were talking about the test result? About how we're going to deal with this going forward?" Sophia dropped her school bag on the floor and sat in the chair opposite the two adults. "Because I've thought a lot about it." "What have you thought about, dear?" Rose asked, concerned by the determination in her daughter's voice. "About having a father, about how this changes our lives, and about what I want." Mark leaned forward, eager to hear his daughter's perspective. "And what do you want, Sophia?" "I want to get to know you, really. Not as the rich man who shows up here now and then with expensive gifts. I want to know who you are, what you like, how you think. I want you to get to know me, too." "But dear," Rose interrupted, "things aren't that simple." "Why not, Mum? Because we're afraid of what people will say? Because he has money and we don't? I'm tired of living in hiding." Mark felt a wave of pride at his daughter's courage, but also realized the complexity of the situation. "Sophia, I want the same thing as you, but your mother has reasons to be worried. My world is complicated, full of people who might try to harm us." Then let's face it together. The simplicity of Sophia's statement contrasted with the complexity of the emotions circulating in the room. Rose knew her daughter was right, but she still feared the consequences of public exposure. 2 weeks later, the decision was taken out of their hands. An investigative reporter had started following Mark after receiving an anonymous tip about his frequent visits to the council estate. Photographs of Mark and Sophia getting ice cream together appeared on a gossip blog with the headline, "Millionaire keeps 17-year-old in poor neighborhood." The insinuation was clear and devastating. The blog suggested that Mark was involved in something improper with a minor, and that Rose was facilitating this situation out of financial interest. Rose found out about the publication when a neighbor showed her the phone, horrified. The photos showed Mark and Sophia in innocent moments, but the angles and captions created a completely distorted narrative. "They're saying you're selling your daughter, Rose," the neighbor said, indignant. "Everyone's talking about it. You need to do something." Rose felt her world collapse again. It was exactly what she had feared all these years. The press had turned her situation into a sordid scandal, painting her as an unscrupulous mother who exploited her own daughter. When Sophia arrived home from school that day, she found her mother crying in the kitchen, phone in hand. "Mum, what happened?" Rose showed the war screen to her daughter, who read the article with growing indignation. "This is a lie. They don't have the right to... They have the right to write whatever they want, Sophia. And people always believe the worst." Sophia picked up her own phone and called Mark immediately. "Have you seen what they're writing about us?" "Yes, Sophia. My lawyers are already working to have the publication removed and to sue the blog for defamation." "That's not enough. They're destroying my mum's reputation." "I know, and I'm going to fix it." "How?" Mark took a deep breath, knowing that the time had come to make the most important decision of his life, by telling the truth, publicly. "Mark, no." Rose had taken the phone from Sophia's hands. "This will make everything worse. Your family, your business." "I don't care about business, Rose, and my family will have to accept it. Sophia is my daughter, and I'm not hiding that anymore." That same evening, Mark called a press conference at his office. Journalists from all London outlets attended, curious about what the United Kingdom's most influential businessman had to declare. With Rose and Sophia by his side, Mark looked directly at the cameras and spoke the words that changed everything. "My name is Mark Allison, and Sophia is my daughter. 17 years ago, I made a terrible mistake by not taking responsibility as a father. Rose Carter raised our daughter alone, with dignity and love, while I built a financial empire that means nothing compared to the family I lost. The insinuations published today are not only false, but cruel to a woman and a young person who deserve only respect and admiration." The silence in the auditorium was followed by an explosion of camera flashes and shouted questions. Mark answered them, all with brutal honesty about his past, his regret, and his determination to be a present father from that day forward. Mark's public declaration dominated newspaper headlines the next day. "Businessman acknowledges paternity of 17-year-old" was the main headline, accompanied by analyses of his courage in publicly owning a past mistake and Rose's story of overcoming adversity as a single mother. But not everyone was pleased with the revelation. The Allison family, especially Agnes, Mark's mother, was furious about the public exposure. She had built her social life based on the family's impeccable reputation, and now she felt that reputation was tarnished. The morning after the press conference, Agnes appeared at the door of the faded blue house, accompanied by 2 lawyers and a social worker. "Rose Carter?" asked the social worker in an official voice. "Yes?" "We are here to assess the living conditions of Sophia Carter. There are questions about the suitability of the current environment for a minor who is now admittedly an heiress to one of the United Kingdom's most important fortunes." Rose felt as if she was living her worst nightmare again. 17 years later, the Allison family was once again trying to destroy her life, but this time they also wanted to take Sophia from her. Sophia, who had overheard the conversation from the kitchen, appeared in the living room with a determination that surprised everyone present. "You have no right to question the way my mother raised me," She's the best mum in the world and I'm not going anywhere." Agnes looked at the granddaughter she was meeting for the first time, seeing in her unmistakable traits of the Allison family, but also a strength of character that clearly came from Rose. "Child, you don't understand the implications of your new social position. You need proper education, an appropriate environment. I understand perfectly, and I understand that you are trying to separate a family that has just reunited." It was then that Mark arrived, having been alerted by Rose about the unexpected visit. Upon seeing his mother and the lawyers in the simple house, his expression hardened. "Mother, what are you doing here?" "Protecting the interests of our family, Mark, and your daughter." "My daughter is perfectly protected where she is. In a house without adequate conditions, with a woman who clearly cannot offer the kind of education an Allison deserves. With the woman who loved her and raised her alone while I failed as a father." The battle was just beginning, and everyone knew that the fight for Sophia's custody would be much more complex than anyone had imagined. The ensuing legal battle was one of the most closely followed by the national press. Agnes Allison had hired the best lawyers in the United Kingdom to question Rose's ability to raise a young woman who was now admittedly an heiress to one of the country's greatest fortunes. The central argument was that Sophia deserved an environment that matched her new social and economic position. On the other side, Mark surprised everyone by hiring a legal team to defend Rose and challenge his own family. For the first time in his life, he was fighting against the family empire that had built his identity, choosing to stand on the right side rather than the powerful side. "Mr. Allison," said the family's lawyer during a tense meeting, "you are fighting against your own interests. As an heiress, Sophia is entitled to an education and environment compatible with her position. Sophia has the right to continue living with the mother who loved her unconditionally for 17 years, Mark replied firmly. "That is the only position that matters to me." The proceedings dragged on for months. During this period, social workers made regular visits to the faded blue house, analyzing every detail of Rose and Sophia's lives. The press followed every development, turning the family into characters in a national drama. Sophia, in turn, demonstrated impressive maturity throughout the process. She refused to be intimidated by the Allison family's lawyers and remained firm in her position that she wanted to continue living with her mother. "My mother raised me with love, values, and dignity," she declared during a hearing. "She worked 3 jobs to put me through school, taught me the importance of honesty and hard work. I don't see how a mansion can be more valuable than that." Rose watched her daughter speak with pride mixed with concern. Sophia was growing up in the midst of that turmoil, but Rose feared that public exposure could negatively mark the teenager. Mark, however, faced a true social exile. Many of his business peers criticized him for airing dirty laundry in public and for turning his back on his own family. Some business contracts were cancelled, and he had to deal with pressure from partners who questioned his emotional stability. But for the first time in his life, Mark was at peace with his choices. Every day spent living with Rose and Sophia, even under the pressure of the legal process, made him understand what truly mattered in life. "Are you sure about what you're doing?" Rose asked one night when they were alone in the small kitchen after Sophia had gone to sleep. "You're losing a lot because of us." "I'm gaining everything that truly matters," Mark replied, sincere. "For the first time in my life, I'm doing the right thing. Even if your family never forgives you, my real family is here in this house. The rest is just business." The turning point in the case came when Agnes made a strategic error. During a particularly tense hearing, she made derogatory comments about Rose's social background, suggesting that people like her were incapable of understanding the needs of someone from the upper social class. Sophia, who was present at the hearing, immediately stood up. "With all due respect, Mrs. Allison, you know nothing about real needs. My mother understood that I needed love, education, and values. You seem to think I need money and status. Who really doesn't understand the needs of a young person?" The judge, Dr. Victor Miller, carefully observed the behavior of everyone involved during the months of proceedings. He was a magistrate known for his thoughtful decisions and for always prioritizing the well-being of minors involved in family disputes. At the final hearing, Dr. Miller made a decision that surprised everyone. After months of analyzing this case, it is clear that the central issue is not about financial resources or social position, but about true love and emotional stability, the judge began. Sophia Carter was raised for 17 years by a woman who demonstrated consistent dedication, love and sacrifice to ensure the best for her daughter. The fact that Rose Carter raised such a balanced, intelligent young woman with solid values under difficult financial circumstances only demonstrates her exceptional maternal capability. Agnes paled, realizing that her strategy had turned against her. However, the judge continued, I also recognize the genuine remorse and transformation of Mr. Mark Allison, who has demonstrated true commitment to rectifying his past mistakes and being a present father to Sophia. Mark held his breath, awaiting the final decision. Therefore, I rule that the primary custody of Sophia Carter remains with her mother, Rose Carter, who has proven to be an exemplary mother. Mr. Mark Allison will have broad and unrestricted visitation rights with his daughter, including the responsibility of contributing to her education and well-being. The family is constituted not by legal imposition, but by the genuine love and commitment demonstrated by the parties. The relief in the small family was palpable. Sophia hugged Rose with tears in her eyes, while Mark felt as if a gigantic weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Agnes left the courtroom, in silence, escorted by her lawyers. The legal defeat had also been a moral defeat, and she knew she had lost not only the judicial battle, but also her own son's respect. In the months that followed the court's decision, the lives of the three people reorganized in a way none of them had imagined possible. Mark, who had suffered some financial losses due to cancelled contracts and social pressure, decided to use this situation as an opportunity to completely reformulate his priorities. He created a foundation dedicated to helping single mothers and low-income youth, using Rose as the project's lead consultant. Rose, in turn, discovered she had a natural talent for administration and social project management, finally finding a career that gave her purpose beyond mere survival. I never thought I'd be a director of anything, Rose told Sophia one morning as she got ready for another day of work at the foundation. I always knew you were capable of great things, Mum. You just needed the right opportunity. The Second Chances Foundation, as it was named, quickly became a national benchmark in social support programs. Rose discovered that her personal experience of overcoming adversity made her uniquely qualified to understand and help other women in similar situations. Sophia, meanwhile, began her engineering studies at the best university in London, supported by the scholarship she had earned on her own merit, but now with the emotional and financial support of both parents. She became one of the most respected students in her class, known not only for her intelligence, but also for her humility and sense of social justice. Mark learned that being a father was much more complex and rewarding than he had imagined. His encounters with Sophia were no longer awkward visits where he tried to make up for 17 years of absence with expensive gifts. Instead, they developed a genuine relationship based on mutual respect, honest conversations, and shared experiences. "Dad," Sophia said one day, naturally using the word that once sounded strange, "thank you for fighting for us. Thank you for giving me a second chance to be your father. Actually, this is your first real chance. The others were just rehearsals." Mark laughed, admiring his teenage daughter's wisdom. She was right. Everything before had been preparation for this moment, where they could finally be a real family. Mark's transformation did not go unnoticed in his social circle. Many of the businessmen who had initially criticized him began to admire his courage to prioritize family over the status quo. Some even sought his advice on how to balance professional success with personal life. Rose, in turn, discovered that forgiveness was a gradual process. She would never forget the difficult years she spent alone, but she began to understand that punishing Mark eternally for past mistakes would benefit no one, especially Sophia. "You know I didn't expect to fall in love again," Mark told Rose one evening as he dined at the faded blue house, which had now been renovated but maintained its original simplicity. "Fall in love again?" Rose asked, surprised. "With both of you, with the life you built together. With the family you allowed me to be a part of. Rose smiled, feeling that she had finally found peace with the past. Perhaps this really is a second chance for all of us. A year after the court's decision, Sophia organized a small party to celebrate her 18th birthday. It was an intimate celebration in the house that was now genuinely a home for 3 people who had learned that family is not defined by blood or money, but by love, commitment, and mutual respect. Agnes Allison never contacted the family again. She had moved to a rural village where she lived a reclusive life, still bitter about Mark's decision to choose his new family over the family legacy. Some relatives occasionally asked about Mark and Sophia, but Agnes always changed the subject. Mark, meanwhile, discovered that his relationship with Sophia had awakened in him a generosity that extended beyond the family. His company began to implement more humane policies, including extended paternity leave, support for single mothers, and partnerships with organizations that helped low-income families. "You've changed completely," observed an old friend during a business dinner. "I finally understood what truly matters," Mark replied. "All the money in the world is worth nothing if you don't have people you love to share your life with." Rose looked at Mark's transformation with a mixture of admiration and caution. Part of her still carried the scars of the difficult years, but she recognized that the man she had known 17 years ago was very different from the man who was now part of her and Sophia's lives. "Sometimes I think about what it would have been like if you had taken responsibility from the beginning," she said during one of their long conversations. "I think about that too, but perhaps I wasn't ready then to be the father Sophia deserved. Perhaps I needed to go through all of this to truly understand what it means to love someone more than yourself." Sophia, overhearing the conversation from the kitchen where she was preparing coffee for everyone, smiled. Her parents had found a way to transform a story of pain and abandonment into a narrative of redemption and love. On the night of her 18th birthday, Sophia gave a speech that summarized everything she had learned during that turbulent year. "A year ago, I was a girl who dreamed of having a father. Today, I understand that having a true family is much more than sharing genetic material. It's about people who choose to stay together, especially during difficult times. It's about forgiveness, about second chances, and about the love that grows stronger through challenges." Mark and Rose listened, both with tears in their eyes, realizing that the young woman before them had become someone extraordinary, not despite the challenges they had faced, but because of the way they chose to face them together. The press, which had followed the story intensely for months, gradually lost interest as the family settled into a normal routine. Occasionally, an article would appear about Mark's philanthropic work or Rose's success at the foundation, but the sensational aspect of the story had given way to a much more powerful narrative about redemption, forgiveness, and the power of genuine love. Ultimately, the man who had collapsed on the street of a British capital had gained much more than his life back. He had gained a family, a purpose, and an understanding that true wealth is not measured in bank accounts, but in relationships that enrich the soul. Rose, who had spent 17 years carrying a secret and raising a daughter alone, had finally found vindication and respect. Her strength and dignity through years of hardship had not only created a remarkable young woman, but had also transformed a man who thought he knew everything about life. And Sophia, who had started a story by saving a stranger's life, had ended up saving 3 lives, including her own, by discovering an identity and a family she had always dreamed of, but never dared to hope for. The faded blue house still stood on the same street, but now housed not just 2 women struggling to survive, but a family that had learned that love is indeed the only inheritance that grows when shared. As the sun set over the British capital, 3 people sat together in the small living room, where so much pain and joy had been shared, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest victories don't come from getting what we thought we wanted, but from discovering what we truly needed all along. 3 months after Sophia's 18th birthday party, a fine rain fell over London as Mark parked in front of the faded blue house. It was a Friday evening, and he had developed the habit of having dinner with Rose and Sophia whenever possible. Today, however, he carried something special in his hands. "What's that?" Sophia asked when she saw the large envelope Mark held carefully. "Something that should have existed a long time ago," he replied, with a mysterious smile. Rose dried her hands on her apron and joined them in the small living room. Mark opened the envelope and took out 3 official documents. "These are updated birth certificates," he explained, his voice emotional. "Sophia, you now officially carry the surname Carter Allison, and Rose." He hesitated for a moment. "If you wish, we can make this even more official." Rose looked at him, not fully understanding. Mark stood up and, to both their surprise, knelt before her. "Rose, I know I can't erase the 17 years you spent alone. I know I was cowardly when I should have been brave. But I've learned that true love isn't about perfect moments, it's about imperfect people who choose to stay together and grow together." Sophia covered her mouth with her hands, realizing what was happening. "Rose Carter," Mark continued, taking a small box from his pocket, "you gave me the most important person in my life. You raised our daughter with love, dignity, and values that I could never have taught alone. You showed me that being rich doesn't mean having money, but having people we love. Will you marry me?" The silence that followed was laden with 17 years of history, pain, growth, and forgiveness. Rose looked at the man kneeling before her, seeing no longer the lost young man she had known in the past, nor the powerful businessman who had reappeared in her life, but the man he had transformed into through the journey they had traveled together. "Mark," she said softly, "when I was young and worked in your family's home, sometimes I dreamed of moments like this. Then when Sophia was born and the difficult years came, I thought I would never believe in happy endings again." Mark lowered his head, fearing the answer. "But," Rose continued with a smile that lit up her entire face, "our daughter taught me that the most beautiful happy endings are those we build after going through storms. Yes, Mark, I accept to marry you." Sophia let out a cry of joy and threw herself into their arms, creating a family hug that officially sealed the union that already existed in all their hearts. "You know this means we'll have to put up with Agnes as a mother-in-law, right?" Sophia joked, making everyone laugh through their tears. "Your grandmother will have to accept that we are a real family now," Mark said, placing the simple but elegant ring on Rose's finger. "And if she doesn't accept it, that's her problem." The weeks that followed, the wedding preparations revealed more about how everyone's lives had changed. Rose insisted on a simple ceremony, but Mark made sure it was perfect in the details that truly mattered. The ceremony took place in the garden of the Second Chances Foundation, surrounded only by the people who were truly part of their journey. Sophia was the maid of honor, radiant in a blue dress that matched her dark eyes. Some foundation staff were present, along with the neighbors from the street where it all began. Agnes did not attend, but sent a letter that Mark read to Rose the night before the wedding. "Son, I still don't fully understand your choices, but I recognize that you have found a happiness in you that I never saw before. If Rose and Sophia make you a better man, then perhaps I was wrong about many things. I wish you happiness." It was a small step, but they both knew it was the most Agnes could offer at that moment. During the ceremony, when it came time for the vows, Mark surprised everyone by addressing Sophia first. "Sophia, you are not just my daughter, you are my teacher. You taught me that true courage is saving lives, literally and figuratively. You taught me that family is choice, not just blood. I promise you that I will be the father I deserve to be, not just the father I can afford to be." Sophia cried openly, feeling that she finally had the complete family she had always dreamed of. Then Mark turned to Rose. "Rose, you saved me twice. Once when Sophia brought me back to life, and again when you showed me how to truly live. I promise I will never again run from responsibilities, never again. Let fear decide for me, and never again forget that the greatest wealth I can have is the love of my family." Rose, with tears streaming down her face, replied, "Mark, you gave me the opportunity to transform our story of pain into a narrative of hope. I promise that together we will build a future where our daughter knows she can count on us, always, and where our love will be an example that second chances can be even better than first ones." When they were declared husband and wife, Sophia was the first to hug them once again, creating that circle of love that had become the hallmark of the small family. The party was simple, with local music and food prepared by the guests themselves. But as the sun began to set over London, Mark, Rose and Sophia found themselves alone in the Foundation's small garden, finally having a moment to absorb the magnitude of the transformation in their lives. "Dad," Sophia said, using the word with the naturalness of someone who had always said it, "do you remember the day you fainted on the street?" "How could I forget? It was the day my real life began. I was thinking if you hadn't fainted, if I hadn't performed chest compressions, if Mum hadn't shown up." "Don't think about that, dear," Rose interrupted. "Fate has mysterious ways of mending the mistakes we make." "It wasn't fate," Mark said thoughtfully. "It was love. Sophia's love for people she didn't even know. Rose's love in raising a life-saving daughter. Love transforming mistakes into blessings." Sophia smiled and took both their hands. "So, let's make a pact. No matter what happens from now on, we will always remember that we are a family built on choices, not on chance. And that these choices make us stronger." "I agree," Rose said, squeezing both their hands. "Me too," Mark confirmed, "and I promise I will use every day of my life to deserve the second chance you've given me." When they returned to the faded blue house that night, now officially home to the three of them, they found a surprise. All the neighbors on the street had gathered and decorated the front of the house with colorful bunting and a sign that read, "Welcome to the complete family." "The whole street is happy for you," explained an elderly neighbor. "We've all followed this story from the beginning, and we're proud of how you faced everything together." It was Rose who cried hardest this time, realizing that not only had she gained a family, but that she had always had the support and affection of a community that respected and admired her. That night, the three sat in the small kitchen where so many important conversations had taken place. Sophia was making plans for her second year of engineering, Rose was planning expansions for the foundation, and Mark simply observed the two most important women in his life, still barely, believing he could finally call that place home. "Do you know what impresses me most about this whole story?" Sophia said, placing 3 teacups on the table. "What?" Rose and Mark asked at the same time. "It's that in the end, it wasn't money that solved our problems. It was the courage to tell the truth, to face people's judgment and to fight for what's right. Money even got in the way sometimes." Mark laughed, remembering how his wealth had initially created more problems than solutions. "Your daughter is very wise, Rose." "Our daughter," Rose corrected, smiling, "and she learned that wisdom by facing adversities that rich children never face." "It's true," Sophia agreed, "but now I have the best of both worlds, the strength I learned from being my mum's daughter, and the security of having a father who chose to fight for me." As the night advanced in London, the small faded blue house radiated a special light, not from the cheap lamps that illuminated its simple rooms, but from the warmth of a family that had proven that true love can overcome any obstacle. Mark looked around the modest kitchen, thinking of all the luxurious mansions he had inhabited during his life, and knew with absolute certainty that he had never been in a place he could truly call home until that moment. Rose watched her husband and daughter chatting animatedly about plans for the future, and felt a deep gratitude for having had the courage to protect Sophia during all those difficult years. Every sacrifice had been worth it to reach that moment, and Sophia, looking at the parents she had finally managed to bring together, understood that her life had not been marked by the absence of a father, but by the preparation to recognize true love when it finally appeared. Outside, London continued its bustling life, indifferent to the small miracles happening in the simple homes of its peripheries. But inside the faded blue house, 3 people had discovered that happiness is not in getting everything one wants, but in valuing everything one has when one has the right people to share it with. The last thing Mark did before going to sleep that first night as an officially complete family was to write a letter to his father, who had passed away 17 years earlier and whose grief had initiated that entire journey. "Father," he wrote, "I know you would be proud of the family I finally managed to build. I learned that leaving a legacy isn't about the money we accumulate, but about the love we plant and the lives we touch. Sophia carries your blood, but more importantly, she carries values you would have admired. Rose taught me that true strength isn't power, but resilience. And I finally understood that being a man isn't about never showing vulnerability, but having the courage to admit when we're wrong and fight to fix it. Thank you for giving me the foundation that allowed me, even if late, to make the right choices." Mark folded the letter and placed it in the bedside drawer, next to the marriage certificate and the photos of the family that now officially existed. In his first dream as a present husband and father, Mark saw Sophia again performing chest compressions on him in the middle of the street. But this time, when he woke up, he wasn't alone in a hospital. He was home, surrounded by his family, finally understanding that he had been saved not only physically that day but spiritually, and that the life he had almost lost on the street had been returned to him multiplied in love, purpose, and completeness. The faded blue house slept in peace, harboring dreams of a future that was finally within reach for all who dwelled within it. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Mark, Rose, and Sophia has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative of second chances and true love teaches us that it's never too late to make the right choices and that a real family is built with love, not money. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore complex family bonds and the power of forgiveness. You can find it by clicking here. If this story of redemption moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that show how love can transform lives and heal past wounds. Don't miss our upcoming content and join us in the comments to share your own stories of second chances. Until next time.